are actually going to be speaking, telling you more about it from the horse's mouth as it is. But to sort of set the scene, I'm going to just start with a bit of an introduction overview. So briefly, responsible tourism, the bottom line, it's making better places for people to live, to work, and to visit. But the question that I always get asked when I'm engaging with people is, so what do we actually need to do, and how will it actually bottom on our impact on our bottom line? And that's quite often the questions that we need to grapple with and try and explain to people. So I'm going to answer those two questions together as I run through my presentation here. So what you're needing to do, one of the first things really is pulling your green team together. Identify who can actually help you along this journey. And quite often it includes people from maintenance, housekeeping, finance, HR, from all the different departments. This is not a job just for one person. It's for everybody. You know that African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And what we find is that working with your team, it builds the team spirit. It also helps to attract top talent. And through that, it's also got a positive impact on your business as a whole. Looking at energy efficiency, you're wanting to start by doing an energy audit to understand the type and amount of energy that you're using, where you're using it, how you can save on that. Because if you can identify your high impact areas, then you can actually also implement more efficient energy options to actually that are suitable to your needs. Bottom line is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So for us, it's very important that this is actually being monitored on an ongoing basis, and that our members all know what they are actually spending on energy and how it can be most efficient for them. So this also boosts efficiency and will help to cut costs as well, as a lot of our members can also attest to. Looking at water conservation, always good to start with doing a water audit so that you can actually understand the source of your water and the usage. Through this, you can actually identify high impact areas where you can actually implement the most efficient water options available. Remember that less than 1% of all the water on Earth is actually fresh water, and of that, only a very small amount is actually accessible for us to use. So if we're actually looking at water conservation, we also are building the resilience of our business on a long-term level as well, understanding the potential impacts it might hold if there are changes due to climate change or anything like that. So it helps to build resilience. Waste reduction, here we always encourage people to look at the type of wastes, what can be recycled, but more importantly, once you've looked at that, is to see, okay, how do we actually reduce the amount of waste that we're creating, and how can we actually also reuse some of this? Through that, also identify potential sources of pollution and harmful substances. Quite often we think about waste just as the recycling that we do, but we also need to think about chemicals that we are using and how that can negatively impact on the environment. So the bottom line is they reduce, reuse, and recycle. And what we find is that this is usually also something that's the most visual for guests. So you also attract guests that match your values if you are actually showing them how you are actively helping to reduce waste in your business as well. However, at the end of the day, it is really a combination. It is about the environmental impact, it is about the community, it is about good business, and it is more than just eco. It's very much about a journey, but it's not just about the environmental side of things. So it's also important to look at the HR and labor side of things, ensure that you're compliant with all the basic conditions of employment, checking your HR labor policies, ensuring good occupational health and safety, exploring universal access opportunities, wheelchair access and access for the elderly, and that. A reporting shows that there's a 12% increase in overall revenue compared to traditional businesses if you are actually a business that's really looking at how you are certifying, how you are running your business as a responsible business. Looking at social and economic development, here what we encourage people to do is to see how they can increase benefits to their local surrounding them, giving preference to procurement of eco-friendly goods and services, and then also to consider social development projects that can be supported in various ways. So that's what we're actually encouraging, because we also know specifically here in Africa, local is lacquer, it's got a positive impact, and we can't do anything without the community that surrounds us. And I think this is very much a very important aspect that we often find is missing from a lot of the international certification schemes. So from my side, just short and sweet, if you are wanting to know more about fair trade tourism, I'll happy to share more with you. But you can log in online and register there. But just in closing, I've spoken about all of these benefits, and I'd like to hand over to some of our members to actually explain this in more details. If you're wanting to know more about the next steps and what I've spoken about here, feel free to also reach out to us, and we will be happy to engage with you around that. Remember, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience. So whatever you're doing, you're building on that. And what we try and do at Fair Trade Tourism is to support you along your journey and have a framework in place that when you are ready for certification, we bring in the third-party certifier who can actually come and confirm that you have done what you've set out to do. So that's it from my side.
Great. Thanks so much, Grace. As Grace said, I think the big thing with fair trade travel is it's a framework. It's, it is one size fits all in the sense of the framework. However, somebody that's in a bush camp in the middle of a national park is going to be very different for how they execute that than a big city hotel in a capital city. But all of the tools and everything are there to keep you going. If we can go over to some of our members, for instance, PJ, if we can start with you, top of the list. Can you just tell us a bit more why Montagu Country joined Fair Trade in the beginning and how you
Yeah,
saw that journey?
thanks, Kim. Yeah, I must say this feels a lot like COVID times when there were no trade shows and meeting with people, but you sat in front of a
There's a
screen.
lot of
So
people out there right now.
it's a lot of people. So I'm privileged to be here. So thank you so much. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm PJ, and yeah, our journey with Fair Trade started back in 2015 when I was actually on a trip to the UK seeing operators, and one of the Fair Trade certified members were on that trip with me, Paula from the Zeku. And we were visiting this one operator, and this lady really just focused on that one property, and that was the Fair Trade certified one. So I started doing some research, and yeah, went out and it was quite a journey the first time around, I must say, getting all our ducks in a row. But I quickly realized that most of the stuff that we needed to have in place, we had in place. It just wasn't documented, and you know. And then as soon as we got that going, my main aim was to do business. So I wanted to be the one in this area that was certified. So whenever an operator's calling, they would say, okay, fine, but Montagu Country Hotel, that's the property that we can deal with. So it was an economic decision for me at the start, but it has changed a lot over the years. We've embraced the principles. And pretty much whenever we have a staff meeting, when I engage with operators, even with guests, I would refer to the fact that we are certified, and we're very proud of the fact. That's on my business card, it's on the website, it's everywhere. And I do feel that it opens doors more just from a business perspective, but also, dealing with the local community, dealing with some of the NGOs that comes our way. It just makes it easier for them to engage with us, knowing that we have taken this, I don't know, it's like a trip switch that went, and it just makes it easier for us all the way around.
Yeah, PJ, and I think what you said is correct. Some people join in the business just because of the business decision, which is fair enough. Some other people join just solely for an ethical reasoning. But I know even within my own business, even if I want to do something, I need to justify it to, the accountants and everything else. And that's where these systems really come into play. As you say, if you can start to measure and monitor, then you can prove that it actually makes sound financial decisions. Have you changed how you do things besides the measurement since you've joined FTT?
Yeah, definitely. We have changed, and as I say, it's literally from how you employ people, where you buy stuff, how you look at waste, all those things. But one practical thing that we've done here at the hotel is we had this open corridor, and we changed that into a little art gallery. And looking at the whole fair trade focus on giving locals the opportunity, we said, okay, fine. This space will only be utilized by local artists. You need to have a Montagu address, and then you get a solo exhibition space for 2 months. And I'm proud to say that in the time that we've done it, we had 23 local artists exhibiting, and now they have the opportunity to engage with an audience that normally they would not have met. And in total, we've sold 202 works. And the nicest story of the lot is we had Sarl, and Sarl is 92 years old, and he had his debut exhibition here with us. And it was a very diverse, it was literally his life work hanging on our wall. So it was for us also a great privilege. But the nice part of the story is there was a doctor from Cape Town that stayed with us. And on checkout, he bought 8 paintings. And I thought that would be the end of Sarl, because he was just so shocked with with the success of the exhibition. So that was a great one for us.
For sure. And that's what I do love about when it comes to responsible tourism, is just being creative. It doesn't all have to be the boring measuring your waste and measuring your water. And, even though those things come into play, it is possible to measure the amount of money you've brought into the community through art that might not have been there in the first place. And then, as we all know, especially those with their marketing hats on, it's all about stories. So being able to tell the world about those stories is, that's priceless. Definitely. Thanks so much, PJ.
Pleasure.
And please do, guys, put any comments or questions into the chat, so we can always get to them towards the end when we will have a Q&A. If we move over to Michael, I'm not even going to attempt to say your company name. I apologize. I don't think that I can do it, so I'll let you go with that. But if you can tell us a bit about how you started with fair trade tourism.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Kim. It's Khwa. It's easy, Khwa. The spelling is more difficult. Yeah, thank you very much. We joined many moons back. I think it was somewhere in 2007 or 8, 2009. I'm not sure anymore. And we joined after listening to somebody who was speaking over a glass of wine in Daiber. And this was a man that really inspired me. Everything he said just sounded so nice, just how to do things differently and how to be more responsible and how to just make more meaning about your daily work. And yeah, listening to him, he had a business running in Port Elizabeth called Calabash Tours. That's when we joined, and it just became part of what we did. It really became really nice to have all these new principles and to apply them and to work with them. And slowly we grew and we got more used to it. We were really happy when we started winning some awards around responsible tourism, and we just started doing things differently, a little bit differently, and kind of have this thing, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And it somehow was something that just became part of our reality, just look at things differently, and it will just have a different meaning to you. And there's this little simple story that I always remember, that, and it really happened a long time ago. I think it was maybe 10 years or 9 years ago. We had this big day when this really big tour operator came to visit us, and he was looking into investing or bringing groups on a scheduled basis. And they became very critical, and they were there, and I was trying to impress them. And we had this day planned, what we want to show them, all the big highlights, all the impressive things. And we walked across the through the gardens. We were heading to a game drive, and I was really hoping that we see the big herd of eland or zebra. And while we were walking, this person that we were trying to impress, he sort of steered off, went off the route, saw the waitress who was feeding chickens in the backyard, and he walked towards her, and he had this conversation with her. And this was such an interesting conversation where he just got so entranced by her story that she was telling. And the story that she was telling is that this group of people that worked in the restaurant were having this staff suggestion that they wanted to have their own chickens. And the chickens need to give them eggs, and these eggs they like to serve for breakfast. And then the chickens will also provide the gardeners who were eager to have the manure in their garden. And, in the beginning, for me, this was just a horrible thought, we're going to have so many flies in our backyard, and how we're going to deal with it, and SPCA and cruelty to animals and all sorts of things. But this amazing thing is that the staff just absorbed and loved this chicken project. They really started telling these stories over breakfast. Their garden started growing great. And this young lady shared the story. She was just feeding the scraps that came from that they collected through of the day in the kitchen, and fed it to the chickens. And she shared her story. And eventually she shared her personal story, where she was once unemployed, and now she's the mother of all these chickens, and she knows that the little brown one is always the one giving the special big eggs and the beautiful orange eggs for the breakfast table, and she loves to serve those eggs. And this tour operator basically stopped there and said, I've seen enough. This is it. I would like to bring people to listen to this story. This lady's story is more important than the big herd of zebra that we can find anywhere. And from that day onwards, we had, and that was about 10 years ago, we have 4 scheduled tours every week. Brings us about 100 people a week, 4,500 people a year. And that has gone on for the last 9 years. And this chicken story has just really grown to be a beautiful draw card. And out of this came many, many more stories, how we procure and how we tell the stories and how we visit our suppliers, and how we've really become friends with these people who produce amazing mushrooms, or who produce the most incredible community gardens where every vegetable has a story. And we really always make sure that all staff know our suppliers, and that these stories of friends come to the dinner table or the lunch table or the breakfast tables. And it has just made an incredible difference in how people look at their food now, because they just hear a different story, and they hear the passion, of who prepared the food and who prepared the vegetables. And I think that's really how it has really just become so meaningful to us. It has really increased our turnover generally, and just the way we look at things changed dramatically. So that's just a little chicken story. There are many other stories, but I always love this chicken story.
You said it's an old story, and still you can say it with passion. So, as we say, it comes down to the stories. That's what people remember. They're not going to remember the figures. They're going to remember those stories, and they're going to remember how you made them feel. And the goal is to make people feel better, And by doing that, it's the staff and everyone else and how they feel within your business. I know you've been on this journey for a long time now, but is there any new things that you're continuing to change, like new small tweaks?
We're doing everything. We're doing lots of new things always. Lots of new adventures. Lots of ways to tell stories in a different way. I think COVID taught us a lot of things. So we had a lot of time to think and plan. And I think during COVID we made some big decisions that changed our business forever, just because we had actually time to think about it and to plan it and to test and trial it.
Yeah, and to be more creative, and it's getting that emotion into it. Thanks so much, Michael. I love the passion behind it. And then if we move on quickly to Jean, we can go back to each person later on and ask questions, as I say, in the chat, etc. Jean, if you can unmute yourself. but Jean's from Ghost Mountain Inn. And if we can hear a bit more about your story, but I was very intrigued the other day when we chatted about how, you know, when it comes down to the bottom line and making money, how you had a very interesting wedding story as well.
Yeah, I'll put that in. So the reason we originally started to follow the fair trade journey was before we even joined. As some people would know, this hotel has been in the same family for generations. The doors opened in 1962, but the family has been trading in this area since before there were dirt roads. So they have a very big community involvement. And what was happening was green tourism was starting to become very important. And we were finding that our story was being diluted a bit by greenwashing. And so people weren't as believing of where we were going. And we started to follow the fair trade journey in the days when it was still a spreadsheet, and it was a very daunting spreadsheet. But I was quietly working my way through it when COVID hit. And when we came out of COVID, tourism had changed dramatically. And so we decided that with this huge swing towards smaller, more responsible tourism travel, we would join fair trade. And we joined the thing with a passion. And as a lot of people say, we already had a huge amount of what is needed for fair trade in place. What we didn't have was all our institutional knowledge sat in people like mine's brain who have worked for the company for 20 years, or the family, or but none of it was written down in processes that could follow through. And also it was, although the whole feeling was part of community, goes through all our staff. If you come here, you feel like you've walked into somebody's home. There was no formal way of talking through things. And so what fair trade did for us was create focus. It created focus right the way from procurement to how we deal with our communities, but also in taking institutionalized knowledge and putting it down so that going forward, I've retired. If we go, people need to know my knowledge. So that was a big part of our business focus, was getting institutional knowledge in place. It also helped create, business-wise, it forced us to think in different directions. We already went into the community and we don't do set-up tours, but it forced us to help people coming forward with businesses, to help. We've always helped people, but to set up businesses we could use. So we're going, it forced, although we were doing it, it forced focus is what I'm trying to say. And it gave us things to focus on. Business-wise, it gave us one throwaway, was that as we were going towards more sustainable and the EU was coming in with its laws, we started getting these incredibly long fill-in forms from our operators. Now I just send them the fair trade certificate and it's recognized, which hugely helps. It really does. And it gives us that recognition that it's not greenwashing, that we have been audited. It's really
I'm sure
important.
that saves you hours and hours of work.
Yeah, because it always lands up on my desk to fill these in. But it also, just thinking about collecting that data, even if you're not considering it from an earth perspective the way I do, if you just look at it from a business perspective, it can create new business things for us. The wedding you were talking about is we landed a wedding because I could give the data over for that wedding to be done as carbon neutral. So they took all my data for the past 2.5 years that affects carbon count. They sent it off to their own private auditors and came back and said, okay, you need to plant so many indigenous trees. And then they threw in 7 fruit trees, because I have a program that plants fruit trees at schools. So fruit trees don't really count in what they were doing, but they threw in some fruit trees for my school, which I love. But yeah, we got to plant up an area that's got a lot of indigenous things still in it, but we want to take out, it's outside our property, but we want to take out the non-indigenous, and so it gave us something to plant there that would grow up so that we could, without creating a scar on the landscape, look down the road to taking away the Brazilian peppers and things like that. So I got enough trees to plant up a small forest outside our fences. So it's quite an interesting thing, and we wouldn't really have, it's a completely new concept for everybody, but I think it's one that'll grow, is that we can use data that we collect to do that sort of thing, and it's going to be extensively marketed by us as well. So it was quite an interesting thing.
Yeah, because every business is looking for their USP. You know, how are you going to differentiate yourself from
everybody else?
Yeah, and as we don't all want to do it just based on price. Let's be fair. So
all my cursing about trying to gather 2 years worth of carbon data, suddenly paid off in a few seconds, because I didn't have to find it. I just could copy it over and send it to them. It gave me a great validation for a whole lot of hours of slogging, which I'm very happy about. And then the other thing it did is we're looking at opening Sala Beach House, which is a boutique 5-star lodge that's, although it is in the Durban surrounds, it is pretty much not hugely on the grid. And it gave us the ability to, from the beginning, bring fair trade principles and building principles into the planning stage. So the knowledge of what was focused from GMI, from Ghost Mountain, carried over into Sala Beach House, which was really interesting. So it talked to a lot of what we built there, and a lot of the solar dependency, the recycling of water from the dunes that was flowing freely through the area, flood prevention, replanting dunes, all right from the beginning came out of our previous knowledge of fair trade, which was good, because Ghost Mountain is an ancient old lady, and retrofitting stuff is difficult. So Sala took what we learned and turned it into something spectacular.
Wonderful. That all sounds great. Thanks very much, Jane. And then if we can go over to Michel, I know you're working with numerous businesses. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more of that from the point of view of not just one business, but multiple.
Okay, Kim, I think I'm going to talk about, I won't say legacy, but from a fair trade point of view, and I see some of my colleagues led ably by Grace, but I see Emily also from the Netherlands has joined in. A bit of background, I have been involved with fair trade tourism from the time when we launched the first 2 pilot projects, one in Limpopo, which is now called Limpopo, Ribola Artist Route, and the Amadiba Adventures along the Wild Coast. That's where it started in 1999, the concept under the IUCN, and then in 2003, the first 4 tourism products were certified, Spear, Shilavari, Sabi, and Storms River, and it's grown amazingly over the last quarter of a century. And I'm just going to really talk about from where this concept of fair trade came. You know, over the years, we had ecotourism first used in 1986, and there were 2 legs, tourism and environment. And more there's been a focus, which was led by fair trade, in terms of the socio or the socioeconomic leg, like a three-legged pot that we all use at various times in our lives. And the terms responsible tourism, green tourism, eco, fair, and important sustainability. And the word sustainable, we talk about, and there's amazing examples that PJ gave, that Michael's given, and Jean's given. I noticed also a very good friend of mine, Don Scott, who's the owner of Tanda Tula and the Timbavati, is also in on this. And all these guys have amazing examples of how they apply the fair trade principles across the board, and very much on the human side. And my main focus all these years, and now being privileged enough to sit on the board, is focusing on the human capital development side, as I call it, because sustainability has many facets. People might say, first and foremost, sustainable, you've got to be able to stay in business for tomorrow. That's the most basic thing of sustainability. But there is the environmental side. There is the human capital development from a staffing point of view. And then there is on the environmental side, and I know, Kim, you based up in Zambia, or anybody operating within an area that's protected area has to ensure the tangible beneficiation within, but also without, in terms of your surrounding or adjacent communities. And what I've seen over the years through fair trade and all of the certified members and the general members in general, as such, is that is a driving of programs, not only on the staff development, but there's procurement, which has been discussed already by PJ and Michael, within 20, 50, 100-kilometer radius, but also incubators, small business incubator development programs. There's an organization called Inzalo, which does amazing work, Indalo, sorry, in terms of small business incubator programs from communities directly adjacent to communities. And Tanda Tula is one of these fair trade certified products who actually have launched it for the Timbavati in the Greater Kruger over the last 2 years. So just to end off with, to say, I think that in the 21st century and where we've come over the last 26 years from the first time fair trade tourism was used, is that from the consumer point of view, and Michael gave a good example of somebody coming through and talking to one of his Kwatu's team members or family members, as I like to call them, relating the story of the chicken. The marketplace, both in terms of the channel, the tour operator, the booking agents, etc., but also from a consumer point of view, are asking questions when they are charged a community levy or a conservation levy or part of the rate that's charged. It said, oh, we use it for X project. People are saying, can we go and see these projects? Not just accepting that there is this contribution. And I think that's a significant development, that people want to see where their dollar, euro, rand, yen is being spent, and not to catch people out, but to actually have an active interest to say, we would like to go to places where they have these programs, and those programs form very much part of the tourism guest experience. There's that demand, and more you're seeing that, which is great. And fair trade, I would like to say, has led the way in so many ways over a quarter of a century. And quite honestly, there's another organization that's run a country for close on 30 years, and I think fair trade has outdone them in terms of progress. And I'll end it off there.
I won't let you get away that quickly, but I wanted to have a bit of your expertise on the fact that we all know that there's numerous programs out there that can certify you for whatever we want to say, as you said, ecotourism, green tourism, sustainable tourism, responsible tourism. Why fair trade? I know that I have my own journey with it, and I reached out when it was in its infancy and said, please tell us when you come to Zambia, because it only was in South Africa originally. And from Africa's Eden point of view, you know, we love the fact that it's African homegrown. So everything fits what we feel is the most important. And what's important to us in Southern Africa certainly isn't necessarily going to be the same thing that's important to somebody in Europe, as far as our priorities. I have clients sometimes that, tell us off that we aren't recycling batteries, for instance, but there's no recycling program. And then they sit down and they hear a very long spiel about how recycling is the third after reduce and after reuse, and learn all of the different programs that we put in place and how it would be for recycling batteries. So it's just putting it into context. But what do you see, Michel, for why fair trade versus some of these other certification programs for those of us in Africa?
Kim, firstly, I think you've mentioned a number of very important points. I think, firstly, it's an African product, and we're so proud within fair trade of looking at the spread of the fair trade brand, because branding is important in the marketplace. But going throughout Africa, and I mean, we've got in place quite soon linkages with Ghana, with West Africa, with other countries. There's been there's been some discussions further afield, as far afield as Ethiopia off the record. So it's great to see that this is being embraced, the organization, which is an African product. At the same time, we acknowledge that we are linked to source markets in the northern hemisphere of the inverted commas, the developed world. I say that tongue in cheek sometimes. In terms of the US, in terms of Europe, in terms of Asia. And I think that the fair trade has gained a lot of, not only credibility, but recognized in terms of the development of many of the requirements in Europe. Hagedorn, who's also on the board, has led the way in terms of keeping us abreast and ensuring that there's a compliance. So, but for me, the bottom line from fair trade, why fair trade and not necessarily the others, and I'm not knocking any of the others, believe me. The one thing is that fair trade from the beginning, whilst embracing the aspect of environmental recycling of batteries, etc., was people focused, was focused on human development, recognition of resource, human resource, etc. And I think that's what set it apart from the beginning, that the three-legged pot: tourism, environment conservation, and most certainly local community, or the human capital side of it. I hope that kind of gives you some perspective from my side.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think it comes down to, Harold Goodwin, who is, the founder per se of responsible tourism, at least from an academic point of view, did say that, and what was in Grace's presentation, is that it's about making better places for people to live first, then work, and then visit. So in that order. And I think it's a good place to segue into introducing Jess from Flatdogs up in South Luangwa, because much of it is about community up where you are, as I know, in South Luangwa. Many of the things about monitoring water usage or monitoring power usage, is somewhat farcical when you might only have power for a few hours of every day, as we know sometimes in these places. But community is everything. And in my notes, it says you've been there for 20 years, but I'm sure that's wrong. I'm sure it's been much longer than that. And, you've seen the community develop. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. I'm afraid it's like 33 now. But as you say, in a rural area where we are, where schools are more limited, education opportunities are more limited, that was what we decided to focus on deeply, even back in 1990, I think, when we first helped found Project Luangwa, which is our education child development assistance program, because we saw the need for staff in particular, because we run a business here, but for the people of the area to have the opportunity to improve their education in order to either let them fly further and higher and deeper and support more of the community, as people here in Africa do, But also in case they did want to go into conservation for tourism, development. And now we've had such success with this next generation, with people passing through tertiary education, but being able to support their own kids through tertiary education to become vets, for example, who work with Conservation South Luangwa. We've got, people who want to come back as educators to help Project Luangwa in their foundation courses and things. So it is definitely a huge part of where we are here, what we can do to help the community realize that saving all aspects of this area are so important, whether it's the environment, the community, the cultural heritage. One of the reasons I found pursuing this certification process so useful was because when we started doing the HR SOPs and things for the staff and working out that everyone didn't know exactly what we meant. And I think it was Jean who was saying earlier, like, all the knowledge is in my head, and we felt much the same, and sharing why we do certain things, and what they would need to do if there was an emergency, or if there was a flood, or if there was a fire. And that sort of thing has become, it's really interesting for people, and doing fire training, and you can see the staff, the light bulb go on sometimes going, oh, I see, that's what causes it, and no one had ever known because they don't have electricity at home and things like that. So it's all round helping people, improving people's lives, and creating that team spirit Grace spoke about as well. Because when you involve people in these processes and ask them, what would you say the cultural guidelines should be when we take people on a village visit? What do some Mzungus do that upsets you or worries you or something? Putting them into your proposals for people if they are going to visit the village, so we don't upset people, is really important to us as well, and helping that community spirit stay alive with tourism. COVID was a great reset, but it helps us see better what we can do really for the future, I think.
Yeah, and I know you were doing so many of these programs beforehand, and I know you reached out to me early on when you were just about to get accredited and very nervous if you were going to pass.
Yeah.
And I know that, you've had so many amazing programs in place, literally, as you say, for a generation. It's making us feel old, but, they've come through and now they're taking over these senior positions, whereas it was tricky back in the day to find people that could speak English, let alone to fill these roles. You've got people with master's degrees, that are coming through that are from your local community, which is just brilliant. But have you found with your fair trade that you're continuing to evolve, or is it cementing the things that you already had put in place?
Oh, well, I think, we did. We're very grateful business-wise that we did, but one of the things we'd always aimed for was solar power, because bizarrely, because our original president loved game viewing, he put in electricity into this area back in the 70s, I think. But we decided that we'd rather be solar because it is long-term better. So we did that in 23. So yes, we've found that since then, the price of Zesco, our power company, has quadrupled. So actually, the savings haven't been enormous, but we are off-grid formally, and we can now concentrate on efficiencies in other areas that we maybe couldn't before. We've saved all that fuel we haven't had to use. And it does, the staff and team are all actually more interested in getting solar panels themselves and being able to support them, when Zesco is off, because with the drought and everything else, it's more limited even. And so I'm glad that people within the village as well are choosing greener choices, making greener choices, and getting solar panels in their houses and things like that, which I think benefits everyone,
Yeah, definitely. If we can go over to the chat and some questions, there's a few for Grace that she can answer afterwards, just asking about membership costs. I know the audit is not included, but it is a journey. It can take, some people take 3 or 4 months if you really plow through. expected, I think, more 6 months to a year to go through the whole journey. But Grace can always, if you drop your email, she can always send you an email with the costs and the breakdown and the different steps and everything else. And then Kim, did you see any of the questions there?
Yeah, so we had 2 questions exactly just around the process to join, costs, etc. I think what we'll do in the efforts of saving time, and I'm obviously aware that certain circumstances will be unique. I will ask Grace if we can prep a bit of a Q&A, which I'll share with the recording, hopefully by Monday. We can share that out. So I think that'll be best. And then if you want to get in touch with Grace, with Fairtrade, we will include all the contact details for you to do that. Those were the only questions, really just about connecting, joining, costs, etc. That's it. I think also with the recording, because from the speakers today, stories have been so special, I think we will include a bit of the bio as well as the unique stories. And if you wanted to get in touch, we've had a few requests to get in touch with the speakers today. I will include that as well with the post-webinar asset, so you have access to that.
Great.
Don't think there's anything else. If you do have any last minute questions, now's your time to post them.
I think it's lovely just also hearing from different members, both in South Africa and up in Zambia. Jessica, yeah, thanks for your input as well. And I'm also always inspired to hear what all our members are doing. So that's great. Any questions that you might have around membership, around anything like that, feel free to reach out, no problem.
Perfect. I don't see anything else coming through, just lots of thank yous coming through. So I think that's it. Sorry, who's that?
Yeah, Simone from White Waters in Namibia.
Hi there.
Hi. How is the relationship with the other organization? Like in Namibia, we have Eco Wards Namibia, and I think Botswana, they do have their organization. What is the relationship within these, between Fairtrade and these organizations?
Thanks so much for that question, and I think I'm probably best to answer that. So there's a bit of a historical story around that quite a few years ago, and yeah, Emily and Michel just also correct me if I'm wrong or give timelines if needed, but there was a sort of a joint agreement amongst different countries that we'll all sort of pursue our own certification schemes. However, 10, 15 years later, the Namibian scheme is sort of the only one who's really quite active. Most of the others have gone quite quiet, unfortunately. We're still trying to reach out and just see where they're at and what they're doing. But what we are finding is that quite a few of the members want to specifically join Fairtrade Tourism. The main reasons being because we are aligned with Travelife, which unfortunately, as last I checked, none of the other organizations were aligned with Travelife. Sorry, not Travelife, Travelist. And that gives you international accreditation. So that's one that definitely sways it, that people wanting to actually join Fairtrade Tourism rather than the local certification bodies. And then also just the being active. We are a lot more active, I think, than a lot of the others, and our online platform also makes it a lot easier. So even if you are up in Zambia, we're working in Uganda, we're working, yes, as I said, in various the countries. It's still easier to do it with an online system across the different countries than what it quite often is to actually work it's absolutely up to you to decide who you'd like to go with. But the main reasons that we're getting is that it's very easy to work with the online system. It is internationally accredited. And then also businesses that have got multiple businesses, lodges in different countries want to stay on the one system. So then they also opt to go with us across that. I see Emily's just dropped in the link as well some information about the Traveller Certification Initiative. That is in the link if you're wanting to know more about that. Or if there's, I don't know, is that clear enough, or any follow-up questions to that?
No, it is clear. It's just being under the umbrella of African Eden would have been nice also maybe to mention and to talk about the local certification, because in some cases you said as Namibia it's very strong and it's very influential and it's very active also. So yeah, just a little consideration.
Okay. I think that in this specific case, being a partnership between Africa's Eden and SATSA and Fair Trade Tourism, the decision was to focus on Fair Trade Tourism, but maybe Africa Eden wants to have a separate session also focusing on some of the others, which would be encouraged. Yes. At the end of the day, we're all trying to reach the same goal, working towards a better place to live, to work and to visit. So that's great.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining, everyone. As mentioned, the recording and assets will be shared by latest Monday, and we appreciate the time you've taken to join us today. And thank you to our great speakers. Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Kim. Have a great week further, everyone. Bye-bye.